VDH Victor Davis Hanson asks the question: is the left pleased with what they've produced through their dominance of America's cultural and civic institutions? He writes that woke is a religion, not an empirically based revolution. It requires blind faith and an ideological zealotry that ignores data, smears apostates as blasphemers, and is fueled by a climate of fear as it uses public shaming, cancel culture, doxing, shadow banning, ostracism, and career destruction to bulldoze ahead. That it is now mowing down its originators may not matter much, even if for the short term the current boomeranging should be teaching leftists their ideology is unworkable. History, after all, is replete with misguided zealots who, even to the very first shot of their own firing squad, still believed in the catastrophic cultural and political upheavals they had unleashed on others. Partly woke continues then because its privileged creators still cling to the belief what I create for others certainly will not apply to me and mine. And when it does, as it is beginning to do now, they stay long in denial and continue their woke advocacy because they still hope their progressive piety and fighties will someday earn them heaven on earth. Is that what's happening? The sort of natural disintegration, the boomeranging that VDH is describing? Perhaps a current example is the problems that Ibram Kendi is having with his Institute for Anti-Racism at Boston University, where he's being questioned. Now it's public. He's having to lay off employees, being questioned and criticized by professors at Boston University for the management of that institute and so forth. They don't know where a lot of the money that was donated, like the $15 million from Jack Dorsey, went. So is that how it ends? Is that how there's a sort of resurgence of peaceful pluralism in America? To help us answer that question, a writer I've been following for a while, academic and writer I've been following for a while. First time he's been on the show, I believe. Richard Hanania is a research fellow at the University of Texas and the president and founder of the Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology. His new book gets right to the heart of this discussion: The Origins of Woke, Civil Rights Law, Corporate America, and the Triumph of Identity Politics. The Origins of Woke, Richard Hanania. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So before we get to the origins, just in terms of assessing where we are now, is VDH right or is he missing something?
I'm sorry, who is BDH?
Victor Davis Hanson.
Oh, Victor Davis Hanson.
He's so close to him, he gives him an acronym.
Oh yeah, no, I've heard BDH before. I wasn't listening. Was he just on the show? I'm sorry.
No, I was just referencing a piece that he wrote, sort of asking and answering the question: is the left happy with what they've wrought? And he basically says, look, there's some indication that the neo-Jacobins are starting to cannibalize themselves, but there's a long way to go. But I mean, the point he's saying essentially is the boomeranging is the beginning of the demise of the new Marxists, if you will, and that's the way this is going, seemingly to indicate that's the way this is going to end. And I wonder if you agree with that.
Well, I mean, I see it. I see in some ways, yes. And so, like, for example, in the last year or two, there's been 10 states that have done some kind of universal school choice. The backlash in red states to what's going on in the education system, for example, has been so extreme that they're doing things like, giving parents the option, which is a good conservative policy to do anyway, to take their money and go elsewhere. So in that case, like, yes, I think there's a real pushback. Where I live right now in California, I don't know if there's much of a boomeranging. It seems pretty inconstant. It seems pretty, in the institutions. I think the University of California university system just got rid of the SATs, ACTs because they're racist. Just going all in on equity and diversity statements and all this, and there's really nobody who's here to tell them not to do that, and there's no real backlash. So in certain ways, yeah. In other ways, no. I think it's becoming more bifurcated, like a lot of things in this country.
Well, so is part of the, I mean, and this gets to, I guess, the centerpiece of your book, The Origins of Woke. Is there something we're misunderstanding about the genesis of what is called woke that we need to understand in order to fully address it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you asked. So yeah, I think the origins of woke makes a bold claim, and I think it's historically justified. That a lot of the things that people worry about, wokeness, identity politics, it was really mandated from the federal government before it was part of the culture or part of institutions. So universities at the very start did not want racial quotas, for example. It was the federal government that came in and told them to start counting people based on race and sex too, and hiring and promoting on that basis. Business too. Businesses were originally told to start counting their employees, classifying them, and just to find out whether they were hiring enough people, enough minorities, and enough women. So yeah, I mean there is the civil rights law which came out of the Civil Rights Act, which did some good things that people recognize, like ended Jim Crow. Also created a race-based system of government, and what the book does is sort of trace that history and tell you how to sort of unwind what's happened over the last 60 years.
So, why does more and more of life seem like a competition to see who's the most oppressed?
Yeah, I mean, because there are financial incentives to be oppressed. If you go to your employer and you say, you are being discriminated against, one of the civil rights lawsuits are now something like 20% of all federal lawsuits. I mean, it's basically what the federal courts do is they adjudicate discrimination claims. If you don't like somebody for some other reason or someone is mean to you, you don't have a legal claim. You're not going to get rich off that. Lawyers are not going to make money off of that. And so you see these things, and you just see these complaints in the media. You see, the idea that this industry or that industry is not diverse. This is all government regulation. It's government regulation that basically forces this on companies, and then it leads to incentives to people to think of themselves in terms of categories.
So, is there a particular statute or Supreme Court case that we should be focusing on that we haven't been that needs to be unwound to unwind what you're describing and what we're all living?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. So that's chapter 6 in my book. I spell out what have been sort of the worst developments of civil rights law over the years. There's a case called Griggs versus Duke Power Company in 1971, which said discrimination is not not wanting to hire a person of a certain race, for example. It's anything that has a disparate impact. So if you give a test and whites do better than blacks, the business that gave that test is presumably racist, right? This has been applied to school discipline. This has been applied to fighting crime. A criminal statute is racist if it arrests too many black people relative to white people. So the Supreme Court, I think, needs to revisit this. I mean, it's about getting the right case in front of it. There's an executive order that mandates affirmative action in government contractors. I told this to Vivek Ramaswamy, and now he promises to undo that executive order on his first day in office. I'm confident that other presidents will see the wisdom. Other potential candidates who might end up in the presidency will see the wisdom of that. And there's harassment law, which goes over the top, makes it's basically functions as a corporate speech code that could be pushed back on too. So yeah, there's a lot. It's just about people understanding sort of how much of this is just sort of baked into the law.
How much? I mean, the disparate impact thing I think is really key to zero in on because, as you say, you get a Supreme Court holding like that, and then there's just a body of administrative law and action in the courts that follows that holding, and it creates this sort of self-propagating, um, you know, cultural sinkhole, if you will, and that's what's happened. I mean, disparate impact is just a fancy way of saying equity, isn't it?
Hmm. Absolutely. So people think equity is new. It's just something people started hearing them talk about 5, 10 years ago. No, it's been lost since 1971. That's more than half a century. And what's frightening about it? People just think of like tests. It's not just tests. It's anything, right? It's like the EEOC has gone after businesses for, asking about criminal record. That has a disparate impact. They've gone after them for, having a tardy policy that's too strict. You demand punctuality from your employees. Basically, I call it in the book. I call it the skeleton. I call civil rights law in general, but especially disparate impact, the skeleton key of the left,
Uh huh.
because everything has a disparate impact.
Uh
And
huh.
what that means is you basically pick and choose, who you go after and what. And this has been a major source of power for them.
The decision in the Harvard admissions case this year, then on the same topic, Does that have the potential to be the negative composite of the Griggs case?
Yeah, right. So it's not exactly the same area of law, but it's a positive step. Corporate America, even though it doesn't pertain directly to corporate America, there's been stories that they're hiring fewer DEI officers. That they're worried. They're worried about new lawsuits because I think they take it as a hint of like where the Supreme Court, how the Supreme Court is thinking about these things. The universities are going to be the hardest nut to crack because they're so ideologically determined. They're going to really, really try to put their thumb on the scale. You can't watch them all the time and watch everything that they do. I think when you go to corporate America, it's going to be much easier because they care about turning a profit before anything. So people ask, see how big of an impact the SFFA v. Harvard decision is going to have. To be honest, it's going to depend on how long conservatives have the Supreme Court, and who the president, who wins the presidency in 2024, and which party controls the Senate, because that could be, it's like you lob an artillery shell at the enemy and they scatter for a little bit. But if you don't keep going, if you don't keep pushing the law, they'll regroup and they'll find new ways to do what they were doing before. The judiciary is just so important, and then having the executive branch itself would make a big difference because a lot of this thing is just enforcement coming directly from Washington. So those combination of conservatives in the judiciary understanding this, conservatives in the executive branch, I think we can make real headway.
It's interesting because you focus on electoral politics essentially in a way where a lot of other cultural critics will focus on we need to set up our own schools, we need to set up our own media outlets, build our own castles, we need to focus on culture and the platoons of democracy and less so on electoral politics. You seem to be more inclined the other way.
Well, it's both because if you don't, because the federal government will go after you. It wasn't always legal to homeschool in this country. It was banned in most of the country. We have now more school choice, so we're sending the money directly to parents, and they're being able to take it where they want. I'm not against building your own things. I mean, we saw with the censorship on social media. Who's in power in Washington? I mean, you could see it as sort of pushing back on civil rights laws, a way of sort of giving encouragement or giving people room to breathe, giving people to build these alternative institutions. Yeah, I think these things go together.
Richard Hanania is research fellow at the University of Texas, the president and founder of the Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology. His new book, The Origins of Woke, Civil Rights Law, Corporate America, and the Triumph of Identity Politics. Richard Hanania, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
At Signature Bank, going the distance for business banking customers is what we do every day. We understand that business owners have a strategic mission, a drive to succeed,